もうちょっと見てたい。干渉するのやめてあげて。
Hey everyone, Sumo Spiffy here. It's time once again to guess that Banzuke. This one's for the May 2026 Basho, and all I can tell you for sure is there are just enough obvious questions about where everyone gets ranked that maybe the inevitable ridiculous ones won't seem like such a big deal this time around. So let's get into it and act like we know how all of this is gonna play out. But before we kick it off, let's take a subscribe break so you can click subscribe and get us one step closer to beating the Sunday Morning Sumo Show to 10,000 subs. Thanks in advance. Starting at the top, Hoshoryu will remain Yokozuna 1 East, Onosato will remain Yokozuna 1 West because Hoshoryu had more wins and that's how they do it at these ranks. Likewise, Kotozakura is going to go up a half rank and Aonishiki will go down a half rank because Kotozakura was behind Aonishiki but had more wins. He jumps ahead. Kirishima, he's going to go to Ozeki 2 East. Now I goofballed this on the Instant Banzuke. I had him over here. I was thinking of something else. There was no reason to do that. He is in fact going to end up at Ozeki 2 East. That's going to bring the Sanyaku to a total of 9 wrestlers, which means when we get to the bottom, there will no longer be a Maegashira 17 West, just Maegashira 17 East. And the question marks start early. While Atami Fuji is definitely going to go up from Komusubi 1 West to Sekiwake 1 East, with both Sekiwake slots being vacated, I had Kota Shoho in the Instant Banzuke coming to Sekiwake 1 West. Mathematically, he should be ahead of Takayasu, and Takayasu had a losing record, so generally speaking, as a Sanyaku member, he should get pushed down to here. But a lot of people made a really good point that Kota Shoho from Maegashira 5 West really shouldn't go all the way up. He shouldn't get ahead of a Sekiwake who, yeah, he was 7 and 8, but he could stay in place, and I tend to agree with him. So I am, in fact, going to put Takayasu at Sekiwake 1 West and Kota Shoho at Komusubi 1 West. The thing that really swayed me is that if Atami Fuji had been in this position last time, so he was 12 and 3 at Maegashira 4 West, if he had had an open Sekiwake slot potentially, like is the case here that he could go to, I think they would have done that. But he ended up at Komusubi 1 West behind Wakamoto Haru, and that made sense. But Kota Shoho started at a lower rank and had a worse record. Even though the math says that he should be ahead of all of these guys, when it comes to a Sanyaku berth, things get a little bit squirrely. Especially when you consider Kota Shoho has never been successful at these ranks, I can definitely see them leaving him at Komusubi 1 West behind Wakataka Kage because he was 1 East and he's just getting bumped straight up. Kota Shoho and Wakataka Kage could get flip-flopped. I don't think this is impossible. I just don't think it's that likely. The other possibility under normal circumstances would be Wakataka Kage goes to Sekiwake 1 West and Takayasu goes down to Komusubi 1 East or West. However, because Wakataka Kage is hurt, and it was pretty clearly a serious injury even in those first couple of days after the Basho when the Banzuke is made, I think that may play into it. They don't want a guy who may not even fight in May to go all the way to Sekiwake, leave him at Komusubi, it's going to be fine. This may not be exactly how it plays out, but I think it is the most likely. Thank you to everybody who convinced me to do the smart thing this time and not just let my initial vibes carry the day. So yeah, we've got Atami, Takayasu, Wakataka Kage, Kota Shoho. There's your lower Sanyaku. Now you may have noticed there was a little cut and everything underneath the lower Sanyaku seems to have spread out a little bit. That's because I had my final rankings up there and not the math, which is normally where I work from. Oops, my bad, but we can just go from here. Scrolling down, we're gonna look at the Joy, the top 4 ranks of Maegashira. Fujinokawa, he was Maegashira 2 East, he went 8 and 7, he just gets bumped up to Maegashira 1 East, that's no big deal. Takano Sho, he lands at Maegashira 1 West, that's easy enough. Yoshino Fuji should get slid over to Maegashira 2 East and Ichi Yamamoto up to Maegashira 2 West. Now this is pretty straightforward, but when you're trying to put this together and get it right, it's worth considering something like, would they force Yoshi to take the full rank demotion to Maegashira 2 West, because that would then allow Ichi Yamamoto to go up to Maegashira 2 East? Is that possible? Technically yes, because technically anything they do is possible. However, the reason to leave Yoshino Fuji in place with his 8-7 record going from January into March was because, according to the numbers, Wakataka Kage should get ahead of him. In this case, he should stay ahead of Ichi Yamamoto, and there's no reason to think they won't just run the numbers again, so we're gonna leave him ahead. He's at 2 East, Ichi's at 2 West, we move on. Hirota Umi will go back to Maegashira 3 East, Oho 2-3 West, and I have Daisho at 4 East. Now this last one is a little bit of a question because Daisho is mathematically tied with Gonoyama. Theoretically, Gonoyama could get bumped ahead of Daisho. I don't think that's likely because Daisho was in the Joy, he had a much harder schedule, and that should mean something. It hasn't as much recently, but I think especially with it being Gonoyama, him having a lot of trouble having any success in the Joy, and the nameplate, so to speak, making a difference more often than it seems like it used to in terms of where these guys go in the ranks, I think Daisho goes to 4 East. I think a better question, in fact, is will Gonoyama even end up at Maegashira 4 West? Is it possible that Wakamoto Haru gets dragged up from way down here because he was at Komusubi to land at 4 West ahead of Gonoyama? It's not impossible. However, I don't think that's going to happen, simply because Wakamoto Haru, let's put him down here, he was at Maegashira 9 East mathematically, and Gonoyama is at 5 East. 4 ranks. Even if you want to favor a Komusubi over a guy from the mid to low ranks, that is way too big of a gap. It's just too much. But I do think that means Wakamoto Haru is likely to end up at 5 East because everybody else is coming up from really far down, and he is not nearly as far behind the rest of them. Speaking of the next batch of wrestlers, we've got everyone from Shodai down through Chorna Umi. These 5 guys bring up a pretty good question. Now, when I did the Instant Banzuke, I put Chorna Umi ahead of all of them, mainly because Shodai, well, he wasn't that far behind Fuji Seiyun, Asakoryu, and Chiyoshima. He was only really far behind Shodai, but if to put Shodai up here would mean he goes up +3 on 8 and 7, and I'm like, for all of the boosts they gave to winning guys, especially compared to Joy wrestlers from January to March that we hadn't seen recently, 8 and 7 still didn't get bumped up that much, Yoshino Fuji being an obvious example. But in this case, putting him here seems a little more questionable, because not only does that put him ahead of Shodai, but also ahead of Fuji Seiyun, Asakoryu, Chiyoshima, who, going by what they did from January to March, seem to have a better argument for getting bumped ahead. And here's why. Last Basho, Abi was 10 and 5 at Maegashira 12 West, and Kotoshoho 9 and 6 at Maegashira 10 West. They ended up tied mathematically at Maegashira 7 West, so they're both up here. Ichi Yamamoto was Maegashira 1 East, and he was 4 and 11. So mathematically, he was down at 8 East. So the difference between them is only 1/2 rank. Abi and Kotoshoho were only a 1/2 rank ahead of Ichi Yamamoto mathematically. And yet, if you look at their ranks in March, Abi was 5 East, Kotoshoho was 5 West, and Ichi was 6 East. So just being a 1/2 rank ahead was enough to keep them ahead of the guy with the bad record coming down from the Joy. That being the case, I have a feeling Chorna Umi is going to be placed behind Fuji Seiyun, Asakoryu, and Chiyoshima, and it just so happens that Shodai is going to get lucky and get pulled along for the ride. Because Shodai had a winning record along with those other 3 guys, he's not going to go behind them, he's just going to get bumped up a little bit further. So I have Shodai at 5 West, Fuji Seiyun at 6 East, Chiyoshima at 6 West, he's going to get the tiebreaker because of wins over Asakoryu, Asakoryu to 7 East, and then Chorna Umi to 7 West, where even though he's bumped 2 ranks further down than I had him initially, he still gets a 2 rank under demotion, so this is not a bad landing spot for him at all. Next, Oshoma, he's going to go up to 8 East. Asahakuryu is going to get a nice fat jump with his 10 and 5 to 8 West. Could Abi be placed ahead of him? Maybe, I guess, but I don't think he will because he missed some fights, and fair or not, that seems to play a little bit against guys. That's not even really the thing as much as because he missed some fights, he didn't get much in the way of Sanyaku opposition. So that argument of being in the Joy or just outside of the Joy and thus having a harder schedule doesn't hold quite as much weight. Thus, if we continue to go in order, Nishiki Fuji, we're going to put him ahead of Asanoyama. In this case, it's for two reasons. Number one, Nishiki Fuji had more wins, which, again, that is the tendency when they're doing a tiebreaker like this. And the other reason is Asanoyama was 8-7, and 8-7s have tended to have their over promotions as limited as possible. So Asanoyama to 9 West, Nishiki Fuji to 9 East. In fact, if you want to see something weird happen, maybe Asanoyama ending up behind Abi and Hakuno Fuji is going to be the thing. I would be completely shocked if they did this. They shouldn't do this. It would be stupid to do this, but just watch this be the thing. Oh, if it is, you're going to hear about it later. Anyway, Asanoyama at 9 West. Then Abi and Hakuno Fuji, they're going to be at 10 East and 10 West. Both of them get a 2 rank under demotion. That's going to be perfectly fine for them. We can move on. Ura and Kinbozan are next in line. Ura to 11 East, Kinbozan to 11 West. Wakano Sho, we're going to ignore for the moment. Shishi and Toki Hayate are next. Shishi should end up ahead of Toki Hayate again because he had more wins. So that puts him at 12 East, Toki Hayate at 12 West. Now there is a question. Would Shishi get bumped behind Toki Hayate because they think 1 rank down on 6 and 9 is an insufficient demotion? That's a reasonable question, so I looked it up as best I could. If you are a Sumo database user, you may have found that it is down a lot recently, but I managed to find enough uptime where I could look this up. The last essentially identical situation to this that I could find was from last January 2025, which is far enough back that we can't take it for granted they're going to do things this way, but it's recently enough that I think it is not meaningless. So in that case, we had Takara Fuji. He was Maegashira 8 West, he went 5-10, and then he dropped to Maegashira 12 East. Meisei was 6-9, so Takara Fuji's 5-10 puts him at 13 West mathematically. Meisei's 6-9 puts him at 13 West mathematically. They're tied, but Meisei ended up ahead of him at 11 West. Not only that, but from Maegashira 10 West to 11 West is only a 1 rank drop on 6 and 9 in favor of bumping the 5 and 10 down 3.5 ranks. So if that's what they did the last time this happened, and it was only a year ago, let's just go with it. It's the safer bet. So again, that's going to leave us with Shishi at 12 East and Toki Hayate at 12 West. Do we place Wakano Sho? No, not yet. Why? Well, here's why. There has been a tendency, which has been remarked upon here and elsewhere, that guys coming up from Juryo, for the most part, tend to be placed behind anyone who was in Makuuchi and had a winning record. Now that didn't hold last time because Fuji Seiyun was 11-4 at Juryo 1, and a lot of us still predicted he would only get bumped up to 16 West because then he would be behind Asaha Kuryu. That didn't happen. They did the much more fair thing and bumped him up to Maegashira 13 West. In this case though, if we'll just put them in win order for the moment, Kotoe and Takayumi and Tamawashi there, and Wakano Sho to Maegashira 14 West. See, if we had taken Fuji Seiyun from 1 West and put him up to 1 West to 16 West, that's only +2 on an 11-4 record. And even holding him back because he's coming up from Juryo, that is very, very small. In this case, Wakano Sho was 3 West and he was 11-4. So 3, 2, 1. So Juryo 1 West is 2 ranks up, and then a 3rd rank, and then a 4th rank, and then a 5th rank. So that's essentially 6 ranks up on his 11-4 record. That's fine. That's perfectly acceptable. This should be where he goes. In fact, I suppose they could put him behind some of the guys with losing records, but this is a very good spot for him to land, so let's just go with this. The better question is, in what order do we place Kotoeho, Takayumi, and Tamawashi? So, here's what I'm thinking. In general, when there's 3 or more guys who are, let's just say 3, if there are 3 guys who are tied, and 2 of them have one type of record, that is a winning record or a losing record, and 1 has the other, the 2 with the same type of record tend to be kept next to each other. It doesn't matter whether they go ahead of or behind the other guy, they tend to be kept together. And that's logical. Like, there's not really a great reason under any circumstances to put the other guy in the middle. And in this case, having Kotoeho with his 9 and 6 go to the top of the pile, that makes sense. That's in line with how they tend to treat guys with 9 or more wins. Matakayumi, like, he was only 8 and 7, but Tamawashi did worse. So then just put Tamawashi behind him. They go in win order. It is a logical way to do things. That's fine. So what if they put Tamawashi ahead? Well, if they do that, there are some strengths to this too. Number 1, you limit the overpromotion of the 8 and 7 guy, and Toki Hayate and Tamawashi were rank neighbors. They had the same record, and so then they get the same kind of demotion. Now, that's not a reason that they'll use to do this, but that is a thing that can make it just look nice aesthetically, right? Okay, these guys were together, they did the same, we'll just keep them together, everything's nice. And Kotoeho, yeah, he loses a little bit, but he's still getting over promoted a full rank with his 9 and 6. That's fine too. This is absolutely okay. And I should say, to me, this is the most logical setup. This is the one that looks right. But I think my personal biases are coming into play here. So I have Tamawashi actually landing in the middle of this group. This is an instance where I like to joke about, they all yell at each other about do it this way, do it the other way, and then they put the guy in the middle because then nobody's happy. But there's an actual logic to this landing point. If they want to keep the guys with the better records, with the winning records, the 9 or more wins going up, then they want Kotoeho ahead of Tamawashi. But if they don't think an 8 and 7 is worthy of that kind of priority treatment, then they want to put him behind Tamawashi. So Tamawashi going in the middle makes more sense here than in almost any situation like this that you're going to find. So that's what I'm going to go with. Tamawashi at Maegashira 13 West, flanked by Kotoeho at 13 East and Matakayumi at 14 East. Then after Wakano Sho, we've got Ryuden coming up from Juryo 1 East with his 9 and 6 record, and the 3 guys who were left in Makuuchi with their losing records, Roga, Tobizaru, Oshoumi. So now the question is, where does Ryuden go? Now, he really shouldn't land ahead of all of them. That seems unlikely. And really, Juryo 1 East, with not an amazing record, probably he should just end up behind all these guys, right? That would make a lot of sense. But recent history has a couple of competing situations. The last September, oh look, the Sumo database went down again. All right, let me just use this gray screen to try and explain what happened. So last September at Juryo 1 West was Oshoumi. He was 9 and 6. He went up to Maegashira 16 East with that 9 and 6 record. At Maegashira 14 East was Sadanoumi, who was 6 and 9. He got dropped down to Maegashira 16 West. Mathematically, Oshoumi was not that far ahead of Sadanoumi, and he was coming up from Juryo, but he still got the nod. In fact, Asakoryu was Maegashira 14 West, and he was also 6 and 9. He went to Maegashira 17 West, while at Juryo 2 West was Chiyoshoma. Wow, this is sloppy. Was Chiyoshoma. He was 9 and 6. He ended up at 17 East. So that's 2 guys who very reasonably did not have to be placed ahead of the guys who were in Makuuchi previously, but they were. On the other hand, and thankfully I had this one loaded ahead of time, in November, Asahakuryu was 10 and 5 at Juryo 2 West. So mathematically, he had a better argument to go higher than either of those other guys. But he ended up going to Maegashira 17 East, whereas Oshoumi comes back into play. He was 7 and 8. He only went over to 16 West. If they had just dropped him 1 full rank, he would have ended up at 17 East. Asahakuryu would have ended up at 16 West. I'm pretty sure that's what I predicted. I'm sure that's what a lot of people predicted. So you've got one that really favored the Juryo guys and one that favored the Makuuchi guys. So which way do we go with this? Well, there's another part of this story that might be relevant, and that's the fact that Asanoyama was also coming up from Juryo 4 West with his 12 and 3 record. He landed over at 16 East. It's quite possible that they thought, well, compared to Asahakuryu, he should probably be a little bit ahead of him and not like right next to him because he did that much better. So if he's only going to end up at 16 East, we're going to push Asahakuryu down to 17 East. It really wasn't because they thought Oshoumi should be ahead of him. It's that he should be further behind Asanoyama. So the Asanoyama example from November suggests that Ryuden should not end up at 15 East because that would be right behind Wakano Sho. But the September example suggests that he could end up at 15 West or 16 East. And in fact, if you go back a little bit further, you'll find that 9 and 6s usually go up more than just essentially 1 rank or 1.5 ranks unless it just can't be done. So I went from looking at Ryuden as a kind of a lock for 16 West to, well, maybe he could end up at 16 East or 15 West to, actually I think he's more likely to end up at one of those two spots than at 16 West. So let's move Oshiumi back to 16 West, and then do we go with Ryuden and Tobizaru or Tobizaru and Ryuden? And much to my surprise, I'm gonna put Ryuden at 15 West. Now, from a Guess the Banzuke perspective, from a competitive perspective, this probably isn't the right move. I think it's more likely he ends up at 16 West than 15 East, and I think 15 West versus 16 East is very much a coin flip. So if I want to play it safe and just get my prediction points, if I think he's more likely to end up somewhere at rank 16, I should put him at 16 East. But 15 West just looks more correct to me right now. Am I gonna regret that pick? I would call it possible, if not in fact probable, but it's what I'm gonna go with. And going to the Juryo guys, because we gotta fill out one more spot. Fuji Ryoga, he was in Makuuchi and he is still mathematically ahead of anybody who is in Juryo. He's just gonna retake his spot at 17 East with his 7-8 record. A couple people asked what would happen if he had been at 17 West, the rank that went away and went 7-8. Could they move him over to 17 East and just leave him in the last spot in the division? Yes, they could. Would they? I don't think so. I think that is the only way Daiseisan might luck box his way into the division, but even then, I think it's actually more likely they would just keep Onokatsu. But that's not going to happen. In this case, it is an easy call, Fuji Ryoga to 17 East to finish off our rankings. And that is our official Banzuke prediction for May 2026. With that out of the way, I'm gonna go back and rewrite the script for the false start video for about the 7th time. So wish me the best of luck, have a great day, and I will see you soon.